Welcome, language learners, to Language Learning Wellness, the mindful podcast for all language learners who are looking for encouragement and more confidence along their journey. Now, if you are interested in working with me more closely after this episode, be sure to go to the description below to check out my Patreon community where you can network with other like-minded language learners, as well as my coaching membership, the Mindful Multilinguals Collective, if you want to 5 times your language confidence results this year. Let's get to the episode. We're going to talk a lot about self-discipline versus self-punishment. And I think that is such an important topic that I was never really that aware really of how important that was to the success, to the confidence that I have in my language learning journey until about 7 or 8 years in. I mean, honestly. But again, a lot of this that we're going to talk about is very unconscious. It kind of happens in the background, and you can kind of think about it as a cruise control sort of deal, right? So it operates a lot of this unconsciously, right? I feel like self-discipline is actually a lot of the conscious effort that we put into things, obviously, with all of our language study plans and promises to ourselves that we're going to study this much a day or always immerse this weekend, something like that. And then punishment is a lot more unconscious, or rather subconscious, right? And comes a lot from our own psychological patterns that we have developed over the years because probably as defense coping mechanisms for something else hard that we've dealt with in life. And we bring that sometimes into language learning. Now, caveats, obviously, this will not be for every language learner at every single minute of every single day in their language learning journey, right? Because there can be a lot of reasons, why we might not feel the need really to look past what's right in front of us. And what I mean by that is really looking at, okay, I have a study plan for the rest of the month. That's fine, So sometimes, we don't need to always dissect every little thing that we are thinking about, what might be the why behind it, right? Have our minds running like that all the time and being mindful like that all the time. Obviously, being mindful when we are engaged in our language learning in any way, that is a huge component for how I coach language learners to success. But I also encourage you, your brain doesn't need to be on all the time, right? We can be mindful, but then we all deserve rest and decompression at some point. We do need to turn our brains off as well, too. So kind of take this as a food for thought. I do not have all the answers, but I do want to bring this to your attention and really the difference between these two concepts, because if I had known this earlier in my language learning, my journey would have been a lot more joyful. I would have been a lot more confident, and it would have been for a more sustainable experience instead of being so burnt out, overwhelmed, frustrated with myself all the time. Because the fact is, I was my self-confidence, even just about myself as a person, not even as a language learner, it really, really went down because I did not know or really paid attention to the difference between when I was self-disciplining and when I was self-punishing. So I am going to get where is a pillow that I can sit on? I'm literally sitting on the floor. My knees are hurting, so we'll sit right here. But yeah, so essentially where we can start first is thinking about, where are we disciplining ourselves maybe, and where are we punishing ourselves, right? I'm going to I've already filmed a video, like a 10-minute video about this too, that's going to come out later on my channel. By the way, if you do want early access to any of my videos as well that are coming up, because I have scheduled about 8, including about 3 new resource guides for Levantine Arabic, Russian, and French. And those are all going to be early access for channel members. And as well with this video, because I always love to infuse a lot more mindful concepts that the language communities that I've seen embed active in myself do not talk about, or they rarely talk about. So anyways, when we think about self-discipline, that is such a popular word that's thrown out in any productivity video, productivity guru, and especially in language learning circles. And I totally agree, right? Self-discipline, and it's truly a skill, right? It's really building that muscle to master what you want to master in learning a language or, in another skill that requires a lot of patience, and a lot of consistency in a way. We can kind of talk about what consistency actually can mean, but that's kind of for another video. So self-discipline is essential for learning a language, not in disagreement with that. But again, being self-disciplined, that is a lot more of a visible decision that we language learners choose to engage in. What is a more subconscious, very unconscious actually, both in our language learning lives and in our personal lives, kind of tape running in the background, is when we are punishing ourselves. And sometimes we don't even know that we are doing it because it's our own sort of routines of how we choose to punish ourselves. We're going to talk about kind of the different ways that we can do this psychologically in a second. But again, we've probably been operating like this for years. And really, so many of our thoughts, and this goes for pretty much any human being, right? Really studied in psychology as well. So many of our thoughts are automatically negative anyways, that we've probably been punishing ourselves for a good part of our lives as a defense mechanism, but it does show up in our language learning in very subconscious ways. And it is very damaging sometimes in the long term when we do not pay attention to it, right? Or at least come to the consider it, right, as a food for thought for maybe this is actually why I'm stuck. It's not that I'm lacking discipline. It's more self-punishment, right? But it's hard to distinguish between the two. So what are some ways, I guess, the difference between these two? And definitely watch if the self-discipline versus self-punishment video for language learners is already up on my channel. I definitely suggest you watch that as well, because it's going to give you a more cohesive picture about what we're talking with today. But we're at least going to draw a distinction between self-discipline and self-punishment, right? Because we all know more about self-discipline in a way, right? If we say, well, I want to take 5 conversation classes in French for the next month, right? And you stick to those every single day. All right, that is a great routine as well. Ayrton, I'm going to look down at the computer to see all of these comments down here first. Yes, NCH, hello, nice to see you. And Ayrton, it's always nice to see you on my Friday streams. Sorry that I showed up like, 30 minutes late. It is hard to be disciplined in my hobby, says Ayrton. Yeah, it's interesting because self-discipline, right? When we talk about self-discipline, it's meant to be a structure that empowers us, right? And it's also an act of respect for ourselves. I feel like when we tell ourselves you must be disciplined, right? It feels sometimes very hard, right? Or it feels like something that we would define as you have to endlessly slog through joyless tasks in order to be disciplined and get things done. No, that is really where we get self-discipline with self-punishment wrong, right? Because self-discipline is not about ultimately depriving ourselves or denying ourselves, especially like simple pleasures in life or the good in life, the creativity that we can bring to our language learning and our lives, right? Holding ourselves back from that just so we can be disciplined. That is a really big mix-up sometimes mentally that us language learners can get into. And we're going to talk about the consequences of self-punishment in a second and engaging with it so often. And what that can really do to our language learning journey. But anyways, so with self-punishment, right? Self-punishment can really, instead of a structure, it can really manifest in different ways for us, depending on what kind of person you are, depending on what kind of past you have, life story that you have. But a lot of us struggle with negative self-talk at some point or another, right? Saying, I am no good at this, or maybe I should just give up and do something else because this is not meant for me, right? Language learning is not meant for me. I'm not a language learning person at all. Why am I even trying? All or nothing thinking. So saying I am either a complete failure in my language learning today, or I am just on top of the moon, right? 1000% there, right? I have to do everything 100% in order for it to count in my language learning and call language learning done for the day, for example. Another example of all or nothing thinking, right? I'm trying to think as well, kind of restricting pleasure, for example, until you perform a certain way in your life, or even restricting like a whole life domain, not engaging with life fully until you perform a certain way in your language learning. That's another way that we punish ourselves, right? Subconsciously, right? It takes a while for us to really want to pay attention more to how our brain is actually thinking about our language learning and how damaging that can really be, right? But that's another thing. So if I were saying, for example, I just got done maybe from a really hard week at work because I work a full-time job, even though I love languages, it's not my full-time thing. So I would say, I know that advice has been to use dead time, right? Anytime I'm not doing anything, right? Like to immerse in this language, I either need to have music on, I need a podcast on, I need to be constantly listening, right? Otherwise, it doesn't count for the day if I don't do that. And then I feel guilty, right? Maybe for not doing that every single time when I am genuinely tired and my energy levels are not matching up. But I still put pressure on myself. The pressure is higher. The guilt behind language learning gets higher. Instead of coming from a place of inspiration, we're coming a lot more from lack, right? And scarcity sometimes in our language learning when we get into those thinking patterns. So yeah, exactly. So I'm going to try to sit up a little bit higher for you guys so you can see more. But yeah, so there's a lot of difference, right, between those two things. And those are just some examples of how we punish ourselves. I go a lot more into how to assess more of your personality, both as a language learner and just as an ambitious person who has a lot of interests in life, and see exactly, how are maybe other ways that we need to be aware of that we're punishing ourselves, just according to us. But those were just some that I've talked about just in the stream outside of my coaching membership, the Mindful Multilinguals Collective. So then, if we're thinking about those differences, right, and kind of seeing how when we're thinking about disciplining ourselves, we end up self-punishing ourselves. That was pretty redundant. Self-punishing anyways. Then we think about, okay, what might be the consequences of punishing ourselves over months, over years, right? Particularly with language learning. So we start, as I said before, right, coming from a place of inspiration originally when we start learning a language or we start refreshing a language, but that inspiration turns maybe more into guilt, maybe more into shame in the long run, maybe more acting and studying out of fear, acting out of scarcity, right? And really, really thinking about that. So I think there was another thing as well, really when I found myself having such a narrow, like tunnel vision on what I'm doing, because I am so adamant, I'm so determined to reach fluency in a language, right? And I'm just saying that because that's the most popular goal, that's the most visible that we have on YouTube. But there are lots of other goals outside of that, right? So yeah, if we have any sort of self-punishment that's seen in different ways and manifests for us in different ways as well in our language learning, then it's really hard to see a wider perspective, right? More sides of a situation, right? Whenever we do eventually get stuck in our language learning, when we feel a little bit overwhelmed or unsure, or we don't trust ourselves in language learning, right? Then it's even harder to see any other solution that will solve our problem for whatever we're facing in language learning or whatever is keeping us stuck in language learning, right? So that's another consequence, right? Because in reality, I see so many language learners already pretty much knowing what to do, but they really don't trust themselves and they don't trust the part of themselves that may have another alternative solution, but they're really not seeing the full picture because they have just tunnel vision on this very one thing. Yeah. So I'm trying to think as well, other ways really of what consequences can really come out of mistaking the two, right? With self-punishment and self-discipline. I'm definitely going to add more to my video. This is kind of like a spontaneous sort of coming out of whatever comes out of my head sort of moment in the stream. But yeah, it's really interesting. And there are a lot of big consequences for not, for operating right on this unconscious process of self-punishment, right? Negative self-talk, denying ourselves good in our lives that'll make things more sustainable, but we just choose not to, because we think that growing through suffering, basically growing through self-punishment, is going to be the most effective thing to bring about change in our lives, aka master a skill or learn a language, etc. When really the opposite is true. Trust me. So there was another thing. Yeah, I think it's also very reasonable to say we take a lot less risks in our language learning when we are operating from really letting self-punishment take control. And again, the difference between these two things are very, very mixed together. So it's sometimes hard to distinguish for yourself, right? What is self-discipline? How is that really affecting me? When is that turning into self-punishment for me in my language learning? What can I actually do about that, right? That's really what I love coaching language learners about, that's really what I love helping language learners with is what I wanted to say for that, so because it is really complicated, but we can go really, really deep and get to know more authentically how you can learn your language and take care of who you are, right? The human behind your languages, why we may have been punishing ourselves, where self-discipline might have turned more into self-punishment in a way for our language learning. How is that damaging our own personalized routine and our own language confidence, right? Such a big question. So it's really personalized, but I hope from this video and the stream that it gives you food for thought to think about. So there are a lot of consequences to this. And also it is worth saying, at least, that two language learners with the same exact language routine, one can be totally fueled through self-discipline, right? The other can be totally fueled through self-punishment. And they think they're disciplined, but they're actually punishing themselves through their language learning. And that has detrimental consequences in the long run, right? Even to the point of, I've met so many language learners who have quit language learning because they became so discouraged. And it was because part of it, right, was a lot of self-punishment that was going on under the surface that they didn't address. And unfortunately, language learning isn't part of their lives right now. So I'm trying to think, yeah. So if we have two language learners, right, they both are dedicated. Let's take my example from before. So we have language learner 1 and language learner 2. They are both going to participate in a conversation class in French 5 times per week for the next month, right? So language learner 1 is super disciplined, right? They both have a plan, right? They both have a structure, but how are they thinking about that structure? Yeah. What are they thinking day to day in their and how they go about adhering to that structure? That's the main thing that I want us to think about, right? Because whether we're disciplining or punishing ourselves is not going to be very apparent when we just look at what we have to do in language learning, right? We really have to look and be mindful about what's going on internally with ourselves and checking in that way. So learner 1, maybe he is he's very inspired throughout the whole marathon that he is doing for French, right? He shows up every day. He is not guilty or shamed as much of his mistakes when he speaks. He is leading with curiosity about different, teachers that he might meet through this experience, because he's booked several in the month that he dedicated himself to learning French with, right? And they have different accents. They come from different French-speaking parts of the world. So he is using this, right? He's still hitting all 5 days of the week, each week for the next 4 weeks. So he is being disciplined, right? He's writing his notes and everything, but he's coming at it from a place of empowerment and inspiration, right? The structure is empowering him instead of what language learner 2 is going to be going through. So language learner 2 is doing the exact same thing, right? They have the exact same plan for the next 4 weeks to learn French. And they are also, I dare say, let me think, right? So they're also showing up 5 days a week. They make their notes, right? But even though they show up to every single session, they don't speak as much as they think they should. They think they should do a lot of things, right? And they're blaming themselves for not doing enough in class, for example. But they're still learning out of fear because they're so scared of what others, might think, right? And negative self-talk is their sort of sense of self-punishment, right? They have the exact same routine, but their self-punishment is playing in the background through negative self-talk about every single move that they make in those classes. So yes, on paper, they are showing up every single week. They can check that streak off, okay? They are making their notes, right? But the information that they get after class is not sticking as much. They're not picking up as much, acquiring as much, let's say, vocabulary, new phrases, grammar, etc. So then they think, I don't know if language learning is right for me because I'm not seeing the progress that I thought I would be making 5 times a week being disciplined, right? But again, self-punishment is playing in the background and it's largely unconscious. But we are having such a tunnel vision on these 5 conversation classes per week are going to either make or break my language learning. Yeah. And it can be really tricky because when we are feeling really stuck, like Language Learner 2 is, but we have so much tunnel vision and we think we have such a clear goal on what we actually want in language learning, may not actually be aligned with our values, right? We're not checking in with ourselves for Language Learner 2 at all emotionally. We just know, well, emotionally, we know at least that this language learner is stuck and they do feel overwhelmed and frustrated, right? But there's no digging deeper underneath those kinds of things. And they think, okay, maybe I just need to do another month of this, right? Another month of just language learning classes in French for 5 times per week. And this will solve the problem. I just need to do more, right? The thing is, like, not all the time do we need to do something more, right? Language learning does not need to be complicated in that way necessarily, right? Depending on our goals, it shouldn't even really be complicated at all. So what I'm thinking, almost opened the door there, which distracted me. But yeah, you can really see the difference, right, between these 2 language learners and how their mindset is really, really affecting them. One is coming from self-discipline, right? It's an act of self-respect. When we have that self-discipline, and then one is coming from a lot of self-punishment, even though they think they're being disciplined, when really their mindset is the biggest thing that is holding them back from success and confidence in language learning. Yeah. So again, I'm going to come up with some of the solutions that we can start to think about if we do find ourselves being a little bit more of Language Learner 2 in my my actual probably 10 to 15-minute video about this. I'm going to post on YouTube within the next few months if it's not already out. So be sure to look around for that on my channel as well. But I enjoyed you guys being here with me today. I know this was a little bit more of a heavy topic. And again, it's something that I did not really think was important to pay attention to in my language learning, right? Or think that it would really make much of a difference if I paid attention to it in my language learning, right? It took me well over 5 years to really understand, okay, I've been punishing myself this whole time. What has been the consequence of that? The fact is, sometimes self-punishment can get you towards your goal, but there comes a point where we have used self-punishment so much in order to get us to make our goals reality that sometimes once we've done that so much, the emotional turmoil that self-punishment can really cause internally within ourselves gets so bad that then we have to step back and be like, okay, there's something wrong and I need help with another solution. And this is a part of it, right? With really thinking about, where has self-punishment shown up in my life when I thought I was being disciplined, right? Like Language Learner 2. And what is, one thing that I can kind of think about and reflect, just, especially for you guys this week, if you're watching the stream live or if you are watching the replay, I really challenge you to think about that, right? Where was I trying to create discipline for myself? Because I saw every language learner do that, right? Create all these routines. But internally, I was punishing myself to get to my goal. Was the payoff worth it, right? Even if it did get me to my goal, did it get me confidence that actually lasted? Or did the confidence just leave me after one day, right? Or a short period of time. Yeah. That's really what I love working with language learners on, right? The lasting confidence where we can recover so much more efficiently, so much more quickly in order to reach goals that are actually aligned for us right? That's the really big difference. Yeah, we can reach any goal, whatever, but really aligned for us. I want language learners to enjoy their lives, right? I want language learners to enjoy the language learning process. That sounds so easy, but it can be so, so hard, right? Because we feel ourselves getting in our own way all the time. Self-punishment being one of the things, but again, not our fault, right? Because it's a lot of mechanisms and how self-punishment has been manifesting has shown up subconsciously in order to protect us in the past, right? So it can be good, some good from it, but it is worth checking in with yourself about if you have been punishing yourself in the past, even though it helps you get to your goals, is it still worth it for you to do that? Is the value of what you've been doing in the past still serving you and your language learning confidence and your success right now and also in the future? Thank you for tuning in. If you are interested in working with me more closely and also supporting the podcast, do check out the Patreon community that I have crafted just for you, as well as learn more about my group coaching membership, the Mindful Multilinguals Collective. If you did enjoy this podcast, make sure to give a like if you're watching on YouTube, or rate the podcast as well if you are listening on Spotify or other podcast platforms. This podcast spreads the best by word of mouth, so make sure to let all of your language learning friends, acquaintances, coworkers, language institutions know about it if you think it's helpful for them. Take care, language learners, and we'll talk soon.